friends, welcome to this session on the series on expected credit loss. We have already uploaded three videos till date on this series. In the first video, we covered the scope of the ECL. In the second video, we briefly touched upon the various approaches how to calculate the expected credit loss. That is, there are three approaches. One is the general approach, second one was the simplified approach, and the third one was POCI approach. And in the third video, which was our last video, we discussed in detail about the general approach. And in this session, we are going to take up another approach, which is the simplified approach. So let's begin. So friends, before we discuss about the simplified approach, let us do a quick recap of what we discussed under the general approach. So general approach was a three-stage approach. There were three stages in the general approach: stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. And all these stages were dependent on the changes in the credit risk of a financial asset since its initial recognition. So let us assume a financial asset was in stage 1 and a 12-month ECL was computed. And then there is a significant increase in the credit risk, and as such, the financial asset moved from stage 1 to stage 2. And in stage 2, a lifetime ECL would be calculated. Now let us assume the financial asset has become a credit impaired, and as such the financial asset will move from stage 2 to stage 3 and a lifetime ECL would be computed. And how ECL would be computed? ECL was PD into LGD into EAD. And what was PD? PD was probability of default, EAD was exposure at default, and LGD was loss given default. In the simplified approach, because it is a simplified approach, an entity is not required to track changes in the credit risk. As such, there are no three stages. There is no requirement to calculate PD, EAD, or LGD. Entity is not required to track any changes in the credit risk. Simplified approach is intended mainly for trade receivables, contract assets, and lease receivables that do not contain significant financial component. And in case there is a financial component involved, significant financial component is involved, entity has an option to choose either the simplified approach or the general approach. So in case of simplified approach, an entity recognizes impairment loss allowance based on lifetime ECLs at each reporting date right from its initial recognition. And why lifetime ECL is computed? Because these financial assets are generally short term in nature, which are due within first 12 months only, and as such a 12-month ECL and a lifetime ECL would be same. So friends, let us now discuss how ECL is computed under the simplified approach. In case of a simplified approach, an entity is required to create a provision matrix which is used to calculate expected credit loss. So let us now take a look at the provision matrix which is there on the screen. So let us say a trade receivable or a financial asset is in the first bucket, that is non-past due. An entity estimates that 1% of the carrying value will be required as a provision. And if the financial asset moves to the next bucket, that is 0 to 30 days past due, a 3% provision is required. Similarly, in the bucket 30 to 90 days past due, a 5% will be required. 90 to 80 days past due, a 20% provision is required. 180 to 360 days past due, 50% provision is required. And above 360 days, 100% of the carrying value is required. So friends, let us now compute ECL with the help of an example. So let's say days past dues are 0 to 30 days, 30 to 60 days, 60 to 90 days, 90 to 180 days, 180 to 360 days, and above 360 days past due. So let's say a 5% provision is required in 0 to 30 days, 10% provision is required in 30 to 60 days. Similarly, 15%, 20%, 50%, and 100 provision percentage is required for all these buckets. So let's say amount outstanding in this bucket is 1 crore rupees. And then 30 lakhs is due on this bucket, 20 lakhs, 10 lakhs, 5 lakhs, and then 2 lakh rupees. So these are my amount outstanding under each bucket. How ECL will be calculated? ECL will be applied as a percentage on the amount outstanding. So in this bucket, 0 to 30 days, a 5% provision will be required on 1 CR. That is a 5 lakh provision is required. Similarly, we can compute ECL for the other buckets. So a sum of all these buckets will give us a total amount of expected credit loss that is required for the respective amount outstanding in each bucket. 17 lakhs 50,000 is required as a ECL provision by an entity using the provision matrix. So friends, having computed the amount of ECL using the provision matrix, let us now look at how these rates have been arrived at by the entity using the historical data. So let's say the amount outstanding at the start of the period was 1 crore rupees. An entity receives 50 lakh rupees in 0 to 30 days time frame. So the balance amount remains as 50 lakh rupees. This 50 lakh rupees will be carried forward to the next aging group, which is 30 to 60 days. Now the entity receives another 30 lakh rupees. So the amount outstanding will become 20 lakh rupees, which will be carried forward to the next aging group. Similarly, entity receives 10 lakh rupees. Now entity receives 5 lakh rupees. And in this bucket, entity receives 2 lakh 50,000 rupees. So 2 lakh 50,000 rupees is now pending. And after reaching 360 days, the customer has denied making the payment. And as such, entity has to write off this amount of 2 lakh 50,000 rupees. So this is the historical data which was there with the entity. How historical rates will be computed for each bucket? We will take 2,50,000, which is the actual default in which is written off by the entity, divided by the amount which was there at the start of the period. So 3% is the historical loss rate in the bucket 0 to 30 days past due. Similarly, we can compute the percentages for all the buckets. It is 5%, and then it will be 13%, and then it will be 25%, and then it will be 50%. And now it above 360 days, because this amount has been written off, 100% provision will be required. So guys, in this way we will calculate the historical loss rates as per the historical data which is there with the entity. An entity may take a 3 years historical data to compute the historical loss rate. An entity may take a 5 years data to compute a historical loss rate. So friends, I hope now you know how an entity arrives as the historical loss rates by using the historical data, and how to apply these historical rates on the amount outstanding on each of the bucket to arrive at the final ECL provision. But remember, these are the historical loss rates. Ind AS 109 requires an entity to adjust these historical rates by using the forward-looking information. We will discuss more about the forward-looking information in the subsequent video. So stay tuned.